Well, thank you very much, and a special thank you to Nigel for inviting me to join you today. As has been mentioned, he is a very charismatic leader, and I have what the media call reverse charisma, so you'll probably notice the difference. But it's really an honor to be here in the United Kingdom, since it is the political culture of Britain, from Magna Carta to the rule of law to parliamentary democracy, transported to Canada and elsewhere, that really laid the foundations of the Reform Party of Canada and the foundation on which you people are building. Now, Nigel's asked me to briefly share the story of Reform Canada in the hope that it may first encourage you, but secondly, there may be some insights from our experience that will be helpful to you in building, taking the next steps for Reform UK. In our case, it began in a meeting of 5 people in a boardroom in Calgary, Alberta, which is in the western part of the country, the best part of the country. And we were dissatisfied. Does this sound familiar? We were dissatisfied with the offerings of our 2 traditional political parties. Dissatisfied particularly with increasing deficits and debt, but dissatisfied with the indifference of central Canadian and government elites to the concerns and aspirations of ordinary people, including the regional interests of Western Canada. So, exercising our freedom of association, we organized a representative conference, much smaller one than this, and to decide on the next steps from 3 options. One was to work within an existing party, which at that time there was the governing Progressive Conservative Party, who were in office at the time. A second option was to create a new Western-based lobby group or interest group. And then the third option was to create a third party, which Western Canada has a history of doing that, a history of bottom-up populist movements, not only as protest movements, but actually got into government, and which is another thing. So anyway, presentations of these options were made to this conference. The Conservative Prime Minister at the time, as I mentioned, Brian Mulroney, we wrote to him and said, we're going to have this meeting. Will you send your strongest representative to argue that your party is the best vehicle for dealing with our discontents? He wrote back saying he refused the invitation and ordered his members not to have anything to do with us whatsoever. The conference, though, proceeded with the presentation of these options, with debate on the pros and the cons, then culminating in a vote with a majority actually voting to form the new party. So what this was is democracy, grassroots democracy in action. And something we learned early on is that if a new party is going to ask the public to trust it in the management, democratic management of its affairs, it is wise for that party to be able to apply democracy in the management of its own affairs. Now, moving on, we contested the 1988 federal election in Canada with 72 candidates. We finished second in 11 seats, but we didn't win any. And 2 of the unsuccessful candidates were myself and Mr. Stephen Harper. Canada's state broadcaster, the CBC, wrote us off as going nowhere and undeserving of its enlightened attention. This may sound familiar as well. But the next year, we had good fortune to win a by-election to get a foothold in the Parliament. And we then used the next 4 years to build constituency associations and recruit candidates, not only in the West, but across the country. And you can appreciate in Canada, across the country means hundreds of meetings in places hundreds of miles apart, because our West Coast and East Coast are 5,000 miles apart. It's a big country. In 1992, the Conservative government was forced to initiate a national referendum on a constitutional issue. And we participated in that national referendum campaign on the no side, which was victorious. But the most interesting thing was that participating in a national referendum campaign, all the things you have to do in that type of a campaign, you have to knock on doors, you have to recruit spokespersons, you have to develop local organization, all that participation helped test our candidates and develop our campaigning capacity, just as Brexit proved a proving ground for some of you. So another important lesson which we learned from that experience, and this may sound simplistic, but it is important. It was the importance of dealing with our internal differences privately rather than publicly. A new public movement like Reform Canada, and I assume this is the case with Reform UK, invariably brings together people of strong convictions. You wouldn't be here if you didn't have strong convictions, but also people who have never worked very closely together as a group. So there's invariably going to be strong differences of opinion, not just on issues, but even on the next steps forward as a party. And we found that when those differences were aired publicly, which today means sharing them through the social media, all we got was headlines, "Reform divided," and therefore not to be trusted by the public. When we set aside our minor differences to pursue the greater goals on which we were agreed, and dealt with our differences internally, the message "Reform United" to do this or to do that actually helps inspire public confidence. In 1993, I know I'm going through history here, but it's our history and your history. In 1993, we were now well equipped to fight a national campaign, primarily because of the experience we got in that referendum campaign. And we fought this campaign on two fronts: that the federal government's budget should be balanced within 3 years, and that Western Canada wanted in on national decision-making in more effective ways, primarily through Senate reform and through free votes in the House of Commons. When the smoke cleared in that election, the standing of the governing Conservative Party in the House of Commons was reduced from its 155 seats majority to 2 seats. One of our jokes was they actually spent $22 million on that campaign. So whenever we ran into one of those 2 members in the House, we used to say, "You are the most valuable members of this House." Cost $11 million to get here. And the other interesting thing about an election, that 106 of those seats, a third of the seats in our parliament, went to 2 political parties that had not existed 5 years before, with the Reform Party occupying 52 of those seats. Another lesson we learned from that campaign, which if we had learned it earlier would have increased our standings in that election, was to major on the majors. As a new party, we felt we had to have a policy on everything to prove that we belonged in the big leagues. And we even had a pamphlet entitled 64 Reasons to Vote Reform. We probably would have been wiser to have offered 3 good reasons rather than feeling we had to have an answer to every question, which then involved us in making up policy on the fly. On one occasion, one of our candidates knocking on the doors, the door opened and this woman didn't even say hello. She said, "What is your position on the ozone layer?" Our candidate hastily looked at the manual under O, and there was nothing under ozone. So he said, "We're in favor of it, at least the western portion." This is policy making on the fly, and it's probably not a good idea. Now, time does not permit me to dwell on the rest of the story, but let me just tell the rest of the story quickly. Suffice it to say that during that first term, while only in opposition, we were able to pressure the Liberal government to balance the budget. We performed well enough that after the next election in 1997, Reform became the official opposition. We then formed an alliance with 3 populist-oriented political parties at the provincial level, and under Mr. Harper's leadership, that alliance absorbed what was left of the old Progressive Conservative Party to become the Conservative Party of Canada. Under Harper, Reform's first policy chief and a Reform candidate in those early elections, that group formed the Government of Canada from 2006 to 2015. Now, before concluding, it's a long journey. It's a long journey from 1987 to 2006. But before concluding, there are 2 other observations I want to make which ought to be especially encouraging to you as you plan the next steps for Reform UK. Across much of the Western world, including the United States, there has been a tectonic shift in the political landscape, from a landscape defined by the old left, right, center conceptualization of politics. There are many people who cannot discuss democratic politics except in terms of left, right, center. But there has been a shift from that to a vertical axis of bottom-up democratic populism versus aristocratic elitism, which characterizes many of our traditional parties. Here in the UK, Reform UK has been the first of your political parties to acknowledge and represent that shift, and to harness that bottom-up political energy, to prove that that bottom-up political energy can be harnessed to addressing current issues, such as rectifying unrestricted immigration, restoring law and order to your streets and communities, restoring fiscal sanity at the governmental level. And you should therefore be encouraged and proud that in this sense, and I mentioned this, I guess, on the tape, Reform UK is in the forefront, not in the vanguard of the politics of the 21st century. This vertical axis, and you see it in Europe, you see it in Argentina, you see it in the United States, that is becoming the defining axis in politics. And the parties that understand it and represent it, particularly from the bottom up, I think they're on the way with the future, not tied to the past. But now a second observation. Well, I am flattered that Nigel should suggest that Reform Canada could be a source of inspiration to Reform UK. I'm acutely conscious that in the political history and culture of your own country, you have much more older, more instructive, more inspirational resources than those of us in a younger country like Canada. Was not the Wilberforce campaign to abolish slavery by law and legislation rather than by force as in America a bottom-up political movement? Political action by rank-and-file people on a moral issue, the type of issue on which the rank-and-file are especially mistrusted by the elites. Were not the 19th century campaigns to expand the right to vote? What was the name of that legislation? The Great Reform Act of 1832. The Israelis' Great Reform Act of 1867. Was not the pressure to create that legislation was pressure that came from the bottom up, not from the top, by rank-and-file people, and which expanded their role in government, just as your movement is attempting to do. So in my view, British political culture contains all the examples and instruction that Reform UK needs to be inspired, to be encouraged, and to be instructed. No other Western democracy has such a rich potential and heritage on which to draw. But now I must conclude. Useful lessons from the experience. Useful lessons from the experience of Reform Canada. Demonstrate your commitment to democracy by practicing democracy internally. Major on the majors, not the minors, and deal with differences internally, not publicly. Be encouraged, as our experience has proved, that there is no reason why a bottom-up democratic movement such as Reform UK, utilizing the same tools of democracy in the very country that gave them birth, cannot achieve similar success and greater success than to what we achieved, creating a credible, capable, reform government for the United Kingdom. And so, as someone who has carried the reform baton in Canada, I am now therefore delighted to hand that reform baton over to this man.
Thank you so much. That was terrific.